As everyone knows, drinking straws have killed most of the sea turtles on planet Earth. But I got to thinking, instead of running another campaign to stop people from using drinking straws, what if I run a campaign to stop people from even touching or being around the things that drinking straws are wrapped in so that they won't be tempted to use the drinking straws themselves? In service of this objective, I made the following PSA. Please enjoy. In the same way that my ridiculous prohibition on drinking straw wrappers might create a buffer that would keep people from being more likely to do something irresponsible with a drinking straw, so likewise, in the centuries leading up to the time of Jesus, the religious leaders made a set of bonus extra-biblical rules that were designed to create a buffer zone between the Jewish people and the actual laws from the actual Bible that they might violate. And so this buffer set of rules eventually went from being a buffer to just help people keep their distance and not get too close to that hot stove. It went from that to being its own set of rules that were just as much the set of rules. And that is at the heart of the conflict over the Sabbath that we run into in Luke chapter 6. So I'm going to let you pause and read the text right here, and then we're going to go break it down together. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Let's get after it. Luke 6:1, here we go. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. So I told you a second ago that there was a controversy here that we're going to run into, but what? I mean, what is there to really be irritated about? To the modern brain, maybe we could say, are they trespassing? Are they maybe stealing a little bit of that grain? Is it light theft? But no, in the ancient world, at least, it was definitely not. All kinds of ancient codes of laws allowed for this practice. And the Hebrews, most of all, Deuteronomy 23, also famously at the beginning of Ruth, not only allowed for this, there was an expectation that you would do this and provide this for people. It's just a form of standing hospitality, the same way in that one town in Canada, they just leave all the doors unlocked in their vehicles in case somebody's getting chased by a polar bear and they need to run into something. You're not stealing the car. You're not breaking and entering if you're hiding from a polar bear in somebody else's truck on Main Street. Seems like a pretty reasonable set of rules pre-convenience store times. So then what's the problem? Well, it's those first two words, one Sabbath. The problem, according to the religious leaders, is that they're doing this on a day where that's maybe too much walking, that's maybe too much picking, that's maybe too much rubbing, it's maybe too much eating, it's maybe too much throwing away the leftovers. I've heard smart people say that there are maybe 4 separate violations of the extra biblical hedge around the Torah buffer laws that were added to the actual Bible laws about the Sabbath going on here. And so when the Pharisees come up, the teachers of the law, the religious leader types in verse 2, and they say, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? They don't mean capital L unlawful like the actual Bible. They mean more lowercase l like the buffer rules that had been made up more recently to clarify questions people had about how much was too much pen lifting, how much makeup would have taken too much work to put on, how far from home can you actually walk. And there were very complex systems for coming up with all of these figures and details. But clearly, based on the fact that Jesus is not correcting his disciples, Jesus does not view those bonus laws as being from God or tantamount to Bible, while the religious leaders would seem to do so. Why does any of this matter? Well, basically what you have here is 2 systems for solving all of the problems coming into conflict. The Pharisees, Sadducees, religious leaders had a strategy for fixing the world's problems or their people's problems, and that was in keeping with the covenants of the Old Testament, specifically the one between God and Moses. Now, you remember, God made a deal with Moses. It made it over several chapters of Bible, so I can't give you one smoking gun verse. But the deal was, essentially, I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people. And everybody's going to know that, because if you obey me, I'm going to bless you in a way that only a supernatural being could bless you. But if you disobey me, I'm going to punish you in ways that'll be really obvious it's supernatural. And either way, everybody's going to be like, those people actually worship a real God, or the one true God. Then the whole narrative flow of the Old Testament, the ebbs and flows and ups and downs, can all be viewed through the lenses of this covenant. You get it right, good things. You get it bad, wrong things. Well, of course, the religious leaders at the time of Jesus, in sympathy and fairness to them, were still thinking in terms of those categories of that Mosaic covenant. So they see, well, we behave well and we thrive nationally. We behave poorly, we get invaded. Most recently, we behaved poorly when we had our own little kingdom and we got invaded by Pompey and the Romans. And we'd really like to get back on our feet and make our nation amazing again. And so we need to get everybody in line. So their strategy then is to make extra rules and then enforce them heavily so that nobody will violate the actual rules. And we can take the whole collective behavior of our people and make it way better and not allow for any societal rot. And when our behavior becomes exemplary enough to impress God, then he will remember that old covenant and he will get us back on our feet and make our economy thrive and throw off the oppressors, and everything's going to work. Jesus' strategy is different. He's not nearly so interested in cold, external, transactional obedience. See everything he said in Luke, see the Sermon on the Mount. He wants your heart. He's talking about this kingdom that has upside-down values that are really good and beautiful. He's talking about people who understand the character of God and are moved by it and want to be in a relationship in good standing with God, and who come to God with him being king and them being servant and assuming a right posture of humility before God. And that by God's grace and his provision for all things, then those servants are made into ambassadors of this greater kingdom that transcends politics, that transcends invaders, that transcends history. And so you really do have two competing strategies for how to make things better. So on the one hand, both Jesus and the religious leaders, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, seem to want to make things better. But these two approaches, one of personal discipline inflicted through extreme accountability and rules that go way beyond the Bible, cannot be meshed neatly with this other one that Jesus is articulating. And in fact, Jesus pointed that out very distinctly in the immediate preceding passage when he said it's like new wine that is going to expand and grow versus old crusty wineskins. You can't put the new wine, paraphrases all mine here, of my strategy, the Jesus strategy, into the rigid old container of the Pharisee strategy. It's going to break. It can't work together. And sure enough, the very next anecdote, Luke, the author and editor of this gospel, is pointing out how that friction plays out. Back to the story, verse 3. Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what's lawful only for the priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.'" I probably shouldn't have read that part yet. That last part is a bombshell. We'll get to that in just a minute. But what he does first is he goes to this Old Testament story with a hero that everybody agrees is good and was doing something good in this story. That's David. And he's referencing 1 Samuel 21, where David's on the move and he's on a godly, noble quest, according to the text. And they're hungry, so they have to go to this place that theoretically you're not allowed to eat. It's on a Sabbath day. And so there's bread there because the priests had made bread that day. And according to the text, the bread was even still hot. So what Jesus is doing is cleverly demonstrating two things. One, the priests must have cooked that bread that day. So according to your bonus rules, Pharisees, the priests in the Old Testament, Ahimelech, I think was the name of the priest in this situation, would have been wrong. And second, was David wrong? Because David was honoring the spirit of the law, but not necessarily the letter of the law in this instance. And it seems like he was doing the right thing and stuff worked out okay to him. So what Jesus has cleverly done is he's boxed them into a corner once again and pointed out that there really is a difference between the actual law of God that Jesus says he is the completion and the fulfillment of versus the bonus law that the Pharisees have extrapolated out in order to curtail behavior and create a buffer between people and ever actually possibly doing something that was actually wrong. Again, the two strategies are incompatible, and Jesus has just deftly pointed it out. But then there's that bombshell at the end. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So as if that little Bible jujitsu wasn't enough, then Jesus flips it around and simply says, yeah, but I'm king of everything, and I'm in charge of the Sabbath, so it is how I say it is. Well, how do we know that he's actually saying that there? Well, it's subtle, but it's there. He's referencing a passage everybody in the conversation would have known, Daniel chapter 7. It's the one that has the four beasts, a lion, a leopard, a bear, and an indescribable thing, and they are in some kind of confrontation or showdown with God, the Almighty, the Most High. And then there's this character who gets introduced there called the Son of Man, and all kinds of authority is heaped on the Son of Man. And this is the resolution to the threat and the problem and the brokenness represented by these four beasts. It's all very prophetic language. You just go read it and chew through it for yourself. And there's all this additional language throughout Daniel 7 about the establishment of this eternal kingdom and the Son of Man having this role in all of that. And effectively, the Son of Man is the one who brings completion to this whole redemptive victory of God. So for Jesus to use the phrase Son of Man, and you will notice that title is capitalized in pretty much every translation ever, for him to use that phrase is to just mic drop. Yeah, but I'm actually king of everything and in charge of everything. And if I say this is how the Sabbath is and how the law is, then that's how the Sabbath is and how the law is. He did not break the law. He did fulfill the law, but he is also rejecting the lowercase l bonus law that doesn't really have anything to do with anything, that being the law that's like my drinking straw wrapper law. So my friends, other than the fact that we're working through the book of Luke, why are we taking all this time on this very simple little question that has a very obvious set of good guys and bad guys? Some of those reasons are obvious. One, I wanted to take a chance to articulate a little bit of sympathy for the Pharisees, who I do think wanted to make things better, but their strategy was flawed. More on that in just a second. Two, I want to keep us up with the narrative flow so that everything hangs together and makes sense. I wanted to point out that the previous three anecdotes, the touching and healing of the leper, the healing and forgiveness of the paralytic that got lowered through the ceiling, and then the calling of Matthew, Levi, and the party that ensues with all of the bad people, would all be a huge threat to the Pharisees, who viewed those things as being decay. That's moral decay in our society. Bad people, unclean people, just dishing out forgiveness. No, guilt is a weight that kind of needs to stay on people so they don't do bad things, so that our collective behavior will be elevated enough so that God will look on us and say, according to the Mosaic covenant, you will now be back on your feet again, and the oppressors will go away, and your economy will be great, and you'll win wars, and everything will be super. And so for them, they got all this hand-wringing and upsettedness about Jesus doing things that seem to tacitly affirm bad people and include bad people. We want the bad people at the fringes of society so they don't bring down our collective good behavior, non-sin average below the threshold that is needed to satisfy God. But Jesus, at the end of those three anecdotes, once again says, you're talking about two different categories here, like the categories of the kingdom and my grace and my forgiveness and this relationship, this fulfillment of all of that law. It just can't fit into the rigid old containers of what you guys are doing and your old strategy. They can't be compatible. And so the Sabbath then is just the next thing in this line of comparison in the Gospel of Luke that says, yeah, I guess we're going to have to pick one of these two strategies. So I do feel sympathetic to the Pharisees who are relying on human good behavior to solve their problem. Jesus points out eloquently all over the place that they're missing the point. The narrative, as I mentioned, moves forward, but also I want to dwell on this because I think there's a helpful lesson for the modern reader. It can be very tempting to do a haphazard read of the Bible and imagine that the Mosaic covenant applies to everybody forever, most notably maybe America. And if America is well-behaved and does good things and doesn't have the swears and the bad people get marginalized and we stop all the bad behaviors, that then God will defeat our enemies, like Russia and China will go down and the Dow Jones will shoot through the roof and everybody's retirement accounts will be full and the economy is going to thrive and everything's going to work. But that isn't really actually what the Bible teaches. And one of the most interesting things about that mistaken thinking about the Bible and the kingdom and the modern world is that most of the people who articulate that would be profoundly against what's called the prosperity gospel. That is the belief that if you donate money to God as an individual, and if you pray, and if you're committed, and if you're a good Christian, you get free stuff from God. You'll be rich, you'll be healthy, etc. The people that would say that's nonsense, that's not how it works, are all too often very happy to then turn around and say, oh, but collectively, that's exactly how it works. If we just behave better, the nation will thrive. And I think there's something really problematic about that. I think what we're seeing instead is Jesus articulating an entire otherworldly kingdom. He's fulfilled that quid quo pro aspect or moment in the history of human relations with God. And now, well, the whole thing is predicated on a king and a kingdom that's greater than all of that stuff. And the call to action is not, let's get everybody else's behavior in line in society to make sure that they're getting it right so we can become likable to God again and he can make us the winners again. No, the chief impulse of the person who believes in Jesus is to assume the right posture before the king ourselves, a posture of humility and obedience and enthusiasm about the values of his kingdom and him as king. And then in going out and doing that, the individual who does so becomes salt and light, a preservative in a dark world, and God's blessing to the world around us goes through the people who are transformed by the king and his kingdom values. It's food for thought, and you can do with that exactly whatever you need to. If you like talking about things like this and processing it this way, I have a week daily podcast, comes out every morning. It's called the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Clever name, thought of it myself. And we're going through the book of Matthew. I say 10 minutes is probably more like 12 or 13 most of the time. That allows for a hello, a goodbye, and a little intro thing, and you still get 10 minutes of actual substance. It's pretty fun. If you haven't checked it out yet, I'd be really grateful if you would. Either way, thanks for hanging out with me and continuing to chip away just a little bit at a time through the book of Luke here together on the video side. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Talk to you soon.